So do you think it has to do with the issue that it doesn't sell well? Why there's only 22 minutes of this devoted, to Darfur? Even on your network, obviously, you guys have paid attention to it. You've gotten a great amount of material, but you can still only broadcast that 22 minutes.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, actually, I think it's probably harder for us because BET is an entertainment network first and foremost.
Mm-hmm.
So people are like, that's on BET? Why? It shouldn't be there. So that was just internally, it's difficult, and it's an issue. It's one of these issues where, because it's an African country and these are black people, it doesn't mean that African Americans are going to be interested, because they have their own their problems here are just as far away. It's just as distant, if you will, as it would be from somebody of another color. And I think the Reverend in this piece, Herbert Daughtry, who has a church in Brooklyn, he says, we should care. That could be my grandmother. Well, a lot of people, they don't see that. So there isn't a connection for them either. So yeah, it's difficult. I mean, 22 minutes, a half hour, we were lucky to get that. We had to push for that. The good thing about it is, I think, because we are an entertainment network, and if we do get reasonably decent ratings, other networks who focus more on news will look at that and say, hey, if the entertainment guys, who generally make a lot more money and can spend a lot more money, if they're willing to put the money into this, then maybe we can think about doing more as well. So hopefully, and I did show this to some folks at CBS News for 48 hours, so I'm hoping that they'll do something. This could be one of those wars that could be as important as sort of what we're doing now in Iraq or in Afghanistan. Because one, it's going to be affordable oil. Two, the other world governments, the Chinese and the Russians, are all sort of involved in this because, as things get worse in the Middle East, the oil supply is beginning to shift to the African continent as the next biggest, largest supply of oil. And Sudan and Nigeria are probably at the lead of that. So it is a place we need to pay attention to because it's going to affect us, beyond the, our pump.
Is it where it's going?
Our interest there?
No, there's just the situation in general.
Again, that'll depend on our interest. I think as long as Bashir and his government can get away with what they're getting away with, there's no reason for it to stop. I mean, one of the things that we don't say in the film because we weren't quite sure, what we heard a lot about, and we didn't want to put in the film because we couldn't double check it, is that, some of the regions that these people are being pushed away from, there's oil underneath there. So there's a reason to push them off and push them into Chad. Because if you can push them off, then you can get the land and nobody's going to dispute it. And then you won't have sort of the agreement that the Darfuris are asking for an agreement with the government that the people in the South have gotten, which is, we want to be able to control ourselves, we want to, run our own foreign policy, and in 6 years, we want to be an independent country, or at least vote to be independent. And whatever is within our borders comes with us. So Khartoum is in the desert for the most part. It's just next to the Nile, so it's only rich because of the water. There's no oil, as we know, so far discovered in Khartoum. So basically, people's around, and it's a huge country. It's Africa's largest, or second, no, largest. It is, because Congo would be second. And but huge swaths of land with people on that land are saying, we want what the folks in the South have had. So you have a government, to some extent, which is sort of, asking to partition this country away. So eventually the president of Sudan will only be the president of Khartoum, which has no natural resources, so I have no way of getting money. So, I don't necessarily know that it'll change for the better, but it could change for the worse. Well, it's interesting. I could easily preach you to sort of Save Darfur and the other movements that are out there that are doing this, but those movements aren't always as clean and pristine as we'd like them to be. The most important thing, I think, really is to just be educated on what this is all about, because this is a multi-layered issue. One of the things that I came away with, and I mentioned this at we didn't do a screening, but at the National Association of Black Journalists, which is the largest journalistic conference, I think, on earth of minority journalists. Actually, the Unity, which is 2008, is the largest, which is African Americans, Latinos, Native Americans. But for this particular conference, one of the things that I said then, and I say the same thing, in about 2 years, this is not going to be a real important issue there. The real issue will be the country will actually split up. It will divide itself. And that Darfur is sort of in many ways, it's sort of a side issue. The war that Sudan has been fighting for 25 years, 27 years, is actually against people in the south. You are all familiar with Alekwek, the model. She's from the southern part of Sudan, the Juba region. And these people are Christian and animist, largely Christian. And they've been fighting with the north, for a certain amount of autonomy. When oil was discovered in Sudan, most of that oil wound up being in lands that they inhabited. So it's in the south. So the government was sort of forced to reconcile with these people. What we found, which is not what we went to go film, is that in 2 years, this referendum between the South and the North will end, and the South has an opportunity to sort of secede and become its own country. And everybody we talked to in the North, in the quote-unquote Arab government, has said if that happens, there'll be a war. And I don't want to sort of lay a blanket statement, but and so I think you'll agree that wars in Africa don't tend to be like wars that we are used to fighting, like in Iraq or other places.